In the late 1500s, Spain was the richest empire the world had ever seen. Gold and silver poured into its ports from the New World, mountains of treasure from the mines of Mexico and Peru. Ships laden with coins, gems, and precious metals crossed the Atlantic under the royal flag of Spain. For more than a century, it looked as though nothing could challenge its power. Yet, in the most ironic twist in economic history, the empire that controlled half the world destroyed itself with its own wealth. This is the story of how Spain, drowning in gold, went bankrupt, not once, but several times, and how its collapse became a warning that echoes even today. What survives when money fails? It began with ambition. When King Charles I of Spain, also known as Charles V, ruled in the early 1500s, his empire stretched across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. He needed endless money to wage wars, to fund armies, and to maintain control over his vast territories. The discovery of the New World seemed like divine timing. From 1500 onward, ships began returning from the Americas carrying unimaginable riches: silver from Potosí in modern-day Bolivia, gold from Mexico, and other treasures seized during conquests. To the Spanish crown, it looked like an endless supply of wealth. But gold, as Spain soon learned, is a deceptive friend. The more silver and gold that poured into Europe, the less it was worth. Inflation exploded. Prices for basic goods like food, clothing, and tools skyrocketed. Ordinary citizens couldn't afford necessities. And because Spain imported nearly everything it consumed, grain, weapons, cloth, it sent all its new wealth right back out of the country. Other nations like England and the Netherlands got rich selling to Spain, while Spain itself grew weaker. King Philip II, who ruled after Charles, believed that with enough silver, he could rule the world. He built palaces, funded wars, and maintained the largest navy in existence, the mighty Spanish Armada. But silver alone couldn't buy stability. In 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy for the first time. It owed so much money to bankers in Genoa and Augsburg that even the flood of silver from the Americas couldn't cover the debts. Yet Philip refused to stop spending. He took out more loans, mortgaged future shipments of silver, and continued fighting wars in the Netherlands, France, and against the Ottoman Empire. In 1588, the Spanish Armada, the pride of Spain's navy, sailed to invade England. It was meant to be a show of unstoppable power. Instead, it became a disaster. The fleet was destroyed by storms and outmaneuvered by smaller, faster English ships. The defeat shattered Spain's naval dominance and cost an enormous fortune. But Philip didn't give up. He borrowed even more, confident that the next treasure fleet from the New World would save him. It didn't. Pirates, storms, and warships captured or sank many of the treasure ships before they reached Spain. The empire's debts kept growing, and its currency continued to lose value. The irony was brutal. Spain had more gold than any country in history, but none of it could save its economy. Between 1557 and 1647, Spain went bankrupt 4 separate times. Each time it defaulted, it tried to rebuild the same system, believing that more silver would fix the problem. But the more silver it mined, the less that silver was worth. By the early 1600s, the Spanish countryside was starving. The empire could no longer pay its soldiers. Farmers abandoned their land because taxes were unbearable. Spain's industrial base collapsed since it relied on imports rather than producing goods domestically. Wealth had become an illusion, a glittering surface hiding a hollow core. In contrast, other nations that didn't have Spain's gold grew stronger. England, France, and the Netherlands built industries, merchant fleets, and trade networks. They invested in production instead of plunder. They learned how to create value instead of digging it from the ground. Spain's empire, once the envy of the world, began to rot from within. The final blow came during the 30 Years' War in the 1600s. Spain poured what remained of its fortune into endless fighting, trying to hold on to its European territories. The debts became unbearable. The crown could no longer pay its soldiers or maintain its ships. By the mid-17th century, the empire that once ruled from Manila to Mexico was bankrupt again, this time beyond recovery. Spain's dominance was gone, and its empire began to fall apart piece by piece. What makes this story so haunting is that it wasn't greed alone that destroyed Spain. It was misunderstanding what wealth really is. The Spanish kings believed gold and silver were wealth. But real wealth, as history proved, isn't what glitters. It's productivity, knowledge, innovation, and trust. When those collapse, no amount of money can save a nation. After Spain's fall, its people were left in poverty. Towns that had once thrived turned to dust. The mines that had fueled its power became graveyards of broken promises. Yet amid the ruin, something survived, the same thing that always survives when money fails: human resilience. Families learned to grow their own food again. Local markets replaced imperial trade. Communities relied on each other, not on distant kings. The story of Spain's downfall became a silent warning to every empire that followed, from the British to the modern financial superpowers. It showed that wealth built only on extraction and debt will always crumble. That when currency loses trust, all that remains is the strength of people and their ability to adapt. Today, the lesson of Spain feels more relevant than ever. We live in a world driven by numbers, markets that rise and fall in seconds, digital wealth that exists only in code, nations that borrow endlessly hoping growth will outpace debt. But the question remains the same as it was 500 years ago. What happens when the numbers stop meaning anything? What happens when the money fails? The answer is what survived after Spain's empire collapsed: people, skills, honesty, and cooperation. Gold faded, empires vanished, but human ingenuity continued. When the systems built on greed finally fall apart, the ones who endure are not the wealthiest, but the wisest. So when we look back at the story of Spain, it isn't just history, it's prophecy. It reminds us that real wealth isn't buried in the ground or stored in banks. It lives in the hearts and hands of those who can build, share, and rebuild again. When money fails, what survives is what has always mattered most: knowledge, trust, and the will to start over.